All right, our goal in this lab is to perform a switch startup and get ready for the initial configuration. So we're going to make the assumption that our two switches that we have maybe were used or had previously been configured, and that we want to make sure they are starting off with a clean slate. So I'm going to start by connecting to switch 0 here. Let me drag this in so you can kind of see how this environment is working. We can see the physical ports on the physical side. The config is my way of being able to look at each switch to see how the interfaces are set up. But we are going to focus here in the command line. So in fact, it looks like we already have some configuration that may have been going on in the command line. And let me emulate what it would be like if we were first logging into this switch. So let's see, disable, and let's see if we can log out. Okay. So we are looking at a switch as though we first turned it on. When we hit enter, as you know, we get into the user exec mode. We know that because the host name says switch and the rest of the prompt is that greater than sign. And one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we don't have any existing startup config. So if we were to reload this switch, there would be no previous configurations. We're going to see that if I try to erase the startup config here from user exec mode, that I am getting an error, basically telling me that that command does not exist. It certainly does, it just does not exist in the user exec mode. We do have to type enable to get into the privilege exec. You saw that the greater than sign changed to a pound sign, so I'm there. And now that I'm in this command line, I should be able to type in erase startup-config. All right, so now you're seeing that I'm getting the warning that this could be a dangerous move. It's a good idea to be able to get that warning and decide whether or not you really meant to erase what's in the non-volatile RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to confirm. And now you can see that the startup config has, in fact, been deleted. Now, the next thing we have to worry about is Vlan Databases. The way in which the VLANs are configured and things with what we call the Vlan trunking protocol are stored in a separate location. They are not in the NVRAM or in the startup config. So we're going to delete what we call the Vlan.dat database, the Vlan database. There it's asking me if I want to again confirm. And in asking this question, really what I need to sometimes do is, well, in this case, let's just hit enter. And there, of course, it's saying, do I want to confirm it again? Let's try it again. In my thinking that I am getting an error, it's in reality that the Vlan database didn't exist. So it is still a fairly new switch. So I don't have to worry about the erasing of that file. So that gives me a good idea that it's already gone. Now that's happened, we have to reload. Now, the process of reloading means that it's going to look for the startup config. And now that I have deleted the startup config, there won't be one there. So I should get into the initial configuration dialog. And yes, going to make sure that I did want to do the reload. What it's doing right now, by the way, it is decompressing the actual operating system so that it can load it into the RAM, as we said before. And there you can see that it pretty much did that fairly quickly. Some devices may take a little bit longer. And I just hit the enter key again to be able to get back into the process that I was at before. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this box and do the same thing to the second switch so that our entire lab setup, we know that each switch is taken care of. By the way, later when we get to talk about things like spanning tree, I can explain why those interfaces did not turn immediately green, but it is a part of the spanning tree process that happened. So let's get into this window and make sure I bring it into view. Go to the command line. Oh, good. I'm already in the user exec. We already know I cannot erase it. So we'll go into the privilege exec and erase the startup config. And yes to confirm that. And again, we can try to delete the vlan.dat file. And no file. All right, perfect. And again, we wanted to reload this one. One more confirmation. And we'll wait to make sure that it comes back up and online for us. All right, so let's go back to our first switch, switch 0. Now what we're going to do here is just verify that, in fact, we have no startup config. Let me go into the privileged exec mode, and let's do a show startup-config. And there you can see that it's telling us that there is nothing present. Let's also do a little bit more documentation to see what version of the iOS it's running. So we're going to do a show version. And now, when you do your show commands, at times there may be more information that can fit into your console window. So whenever you see the more at the bottom, you can hit the enter key to go see one more line, or hit the space bar to see the next page. So there I hit the space bar, and it brought all of that information all the way to the top. And I can, of course, just kind of scroll on up here. And there we go. I can start seeing the beginning of the information. So I can see this is a 2960 switch running version 12.2, release of the software. It said that we did a power on to bring it up here. It tells me that it has 24 fast Ethernet ports, 2 gigabit Ethernet ports. Those are usually the ones we use to connect to other switches. It tells me about how much of the flash that I have, the base MAC address, a lot about the hardware, and of course kind of the basics of what it is. A single switch, 26 ports. 24 were fast E, remember, 2 were gigabits, and we're ready to go. There's much more information, of course. You'd need something like the serial number if you were going to call in for a attack case of some sort of troubleshooting with Cisco or somebody else that provides that service. Now, remember we talked about having information in the flash. The show flash is my way of being able to show you how much I have as far as storage, or files, I should say, that I have in there. This is my total storage here. I have a lot of room free, and it's telling me the size, basically in bytes, of the operating system's image. So, and that's the operating system that we have loaded and running right now. The reason that can be helpful for you is to basically let you know whether or not you have room to put more than one operating system, and some other really cool things we can do that you would see in some of the more advanced courses. All right, now that we're done looking and investigating the switch for some bit, what we're going to do here is do some of the basic configurations. We're going to configure the switch with a host name and an IP address. So while we're already here in the privileged exec, we're going to type in the configure terminal command to get us into the global configuration mode. Now the first command is called the host name command, and from there I'm going to type in SW1. So this will be switch number 1. Notice that my prompt changed immediately to reflect the new host name that I have put in there. If you also remember, the switch's main address we're going to use for management is the VLAN 1 interface, because that's going to be associated with VLAN number 1. So we're going to configure, go into the configuration mode for interface VLAN 1. Now we're in the configure interface. From here we'll type in the IP address command, and it's going to have the address of 10.1.1.11 with a 24-bit subnet mask. So that's my 255.255.255.0, and I'll hit enter. Now, if you're not sure if that interface is up or down, while you're in this configuration mode, you can always type no shutdown to make sure that that interface is up. And there you can see the console message that tells me the state has changed to up, and that both the physical and the line protocol are up. The next thing we have to do is a little bit outside of the work we would do with a switch. Let me close this down. We're going to talk a little bit about configuring the PCs. And from the PCs, we're going to go to the configuration. And for the interface, fast Ethernet, you can see that we have no IP address. So I'm going to put in a static address. We don't have any other servers to help us in setting that up. And the address in this one has to be in the same subnet. So 10.1.1.100, again with the same 24-bit subnet mask. Now that I have that set up, we should be good with our configuration. And now, by the way, if you wanted to, you could actually, in this type of software that we're using, we could get to the desktop and do that through the desktop, but this worked out fairly well. So now that I have the address, let me close this down. And what we want to do is make sure that we have connectivity from this personal computer to the switch. And in fact, you notice you can't really see it, but when I leave my mouse over it, the interfaces do hover. And you can actually get a little glimpse if you did it right, but we'll still focus on the command line. Let's go back to the PC again. Let me move this back in our view. We'll go to the desktop, and we're going to go to the command prompt. And from here, we're going to type in ping the address of that VLAN 1 interface, which was 10.1.1.11, and see if we can get a reply. Now you might have noticed the first one of those four timed out. That's generally from the process of doing the address resolution protocol and trying to make sure that we have the right MAC address. If I were to hit the up arrow to repeat the command, you'll notice that it replies right away because we already have that information stored in our ARP cache. Now let's return back to our switch so we can get an idea. In fact, actually before I do that, let's go down to switch 1 and do the, or switch 2, and do some of the same setup or general setup. So again, we type enable. This time, as you know, you only have to type enough of a command to make sure that it is unique. So configure terminal could be just repeated as conf t. So there I am in the configuration mode. I could type in the interface VLAN 1 instead of typing all of the word interface. So that seems to be working. And then the IP address for this one will be 10.1.1.12 with, again, a 24-bit subnet mask. And we'll do the no shutdown. Now, I'm going to type in the command exit because I am one level deep in configuration mode. And the exit will take me back to the global configuration mode. And I almost forgot that we wanted the host name to be SW2. And there you can see again that my prompt has changed to show that. Don't forget, all of this is in the running config. We still have no startup config. If I were to reload this switch, all of this information I have would be gone. Now we'll go back to switch number 1. And in fact, we'll rename it here on our little diagram to be appropriate so that it makes sense when you're looking at my lab setup. All right, so let's go back to switch 1. Again, let me move this CLI box into view. And what we're going to do now is explore the command-sensitive help. If you are several layers deep in configuration mode, I think, tell you that Control-Z would take you back to the privilege exec. Or if I'm back in the configuration mode, and let's get back into the interface configuration mode, if you type the word end, it'll do the same thing for you. Now let's take a look. In fact, let's actually disable. That's the opposite of enable. And then the question mark will show me what commands I can run from the user exec. Now, you can see it's a pretty short list. Not a lot of options that are out there. In fact, if I did the show command with a question mark, you can see the types of information I see is also going to be pretty limited. So let me go back into enable and do the question mark. And now you can see the number of commands, top-level commands that I can run, are at least 2 pages now in length. Again, I have more privileges of what I'm allowed to do. The context-sensitive help is just the question mark. If I type the command show and hit the question mark, you can see that I have, again, a couple of pages of show commands versus the 1 page I had before. I'm obviously not going to read through each and every single one of these commands for you, but just to make sure that you understand how the question mark works. Remember what we wanted to do is, as an example, is set the time on the clock. All right, so if I don't know the command, that's where the question mark comes in, and I can look to see what list of commands I have. And I do see one that's called clock. I'm going to hope that I know exactly what that is. So the clock would be my choice. And what I'll do, and if you didn't know, if you thought it was clock, remember part of context-sensitive help is to type the first one or two letters of a command without hitting the space bar, to hit the question mark, and it would show you which commands start, in this case, with the letter C. So that also helps you in being able to find the correct command. And since I have not finished typing the word clock, I don't need to actually type it all. That was enough of the command that makes it unique. No other command that starts with C has CLO in it. So I don't really need to type the rest of this command. But what I could do is hit the Tab key, and that would help autocomplete the command for you as well. Now, if I hit Enter, I'm going to get an error message, and it says it's an incomplete command. That means I need to supply something more than just the command clock. So that's where I can do the question mark to see what options I have. In this case, there's only one command that I can run. The command is called set, and then, of course, there's a brief description of what that command does for you. All right, so I'm going to type set, and so I don't get another incomplete command error, I'm going to hit the question mark again. Now it looks like it wants to have the time. So I'm going to put the time in here as 04:22 00, and then after that, there we go. Now it looks like it's not going to quite like what I did, because it's actually not 4 in the morning, it's 4 in the afternoon. So I may have to type in the 24-hour clock format, make it 16:22:00. I already did the question mark, so you see that it either wants the month or the day of the month. So I'm going to type in 25 for the day of the month, hit the space question mark. Now it wants the month. So for the month, I'm going to type in APR for April, see if it likes that command. If it did not like the command, when I hit the space question mark, it would have told me there was a problem. And then it wants the year. So I'll put 2013. And I'll do space question mark again. Ah, there we go. This is what I've been looking for. Anytime you see the CR inside of these little greater than, less thans, that stands for carriage return. That means, in fact, in this case, that's the only option. That means I've set enough of the information here that it would be ready to go. So I'll hit Enter, and I have now set the clock. I, of course, should do that with the other device, but I don't need to have as many question marks. So here, we'll go back to the privileged exec, clock set, and 16, I'm going to make it 23, thinking that maybe it took me a little bit longer. And I've got the clock set. So after a while, you'll get to memorize all of these commands. Now we'll go back to the other one again. So remember, as you're typing in commands, that if you're not sure what the exact command is, you can hit the SH, and then or whatever command it is, hit the question mark. It will show you all of the commands that start with those letters. If that was the only command, then I could hit the space bar, and it would assume that I was typing the command show. And then if I do the space question mark, it appears that is the case, because it does show me these command options. And maybe I can do show clock. And there we go, I can see the clock time as according to what I've set up. Now, one of the things you saw me do, well, you didn't see me actually do it, but what you did see was the result of my hitting the up arrow. The up arrow shows me previous commands that I have typed. And we need to know if we want to have a longer history of commands. So I can type in show terminal, and when I do, you might notice there is a large amount of information that's coming out of this. And in fact, at the very end is what I'm looking for. The history is enabled. History size is 10. Let me hit the space bar. So now we got to the rest of it. And what that means is that the last 10 of my commands will be remembered in the terminal, so that if I hit the up arrow 10 times, I'll have seen the last 10 commands. If I've typed 20 commands, it doesn't matter, they're still not going to be there. This is a great time to look, I think, at some of the other options. Let's see if I can do a pipe and include history size. Oh, okay, so in this particular instance, it didn't like the pipe command with my include. Remember, in some of these, in the versions of the operating system, you can try to make it just a little bit easier in searching for information. In fact, after the show terminal, yeah, it doesn't want me to do the pipe there. Well, that's okay. So what we're going to do now is change some of the capabilities or usability of the CLI. And one of them could have, of course, been the history size, if we wanted to. Like I've said before, if you make a large history size, say make it 100, and you hit the up arrow 100 times, most commands don't take 100 keystrokes, so you probably, unless you need to know the history of what you've typed in, don't need the history to be that long. At some point, you're not getting any return on your investment of keystrokes. But let's go ahead and see if we can do some other work. Well, actually, we're going to do some work with the way in which we're connected, and that's through the console port. In that console port, since we are connected through the console, is where we could change the history size. So again, we need to go to Configure Terminal. And remember that console port, like Telnet ports, are management connections, and so we refer to them as lines. And from here, we're going to go to the line console 0. All right, so it does say config line. Now that we're here, we can use the command history size. We can make it bigger. So history size 100. Now from there, if I wanted to verify it to you, I could do a Control-Z, use my up arrow to go to the show terminal, and now you see the history size is enabled. History size is 100. So it's a quick way of being able to verify. By the way, I hit the letter Q, that's what I'm used to quit the output, so I didn't want to hit the space bar and see everything else again. Now, there are going to be a couple other things that we might want to do. What I haven't shown you is that when errors occur, that sometimes when it's a typo, and depending on the mood you're in, the mode, how's that you're in, this switch or router may think that the command you typed that was mistyped was the name of a host. And so it's going to search for a DNS server to find the IP address of that host. And that can take a long time for you to wait every time you have a typo. So we're going to turn off that default behavior, going back into configuration mode, of asking this device to no longer do an IP domain lookup. Now that turns off the need, in this case, for the DNS lookup. We're going to go back to the console line and take care of a couple other bits of business. One of them is to deal with making sure that I get logged out if I'm idle for any length of time, so that if somebody else comes into this system, they would not be logged in as me. They'd have to have their own login. So I'm using the exec timeout, I'll use the question mark. And you notice they want the time in minutes, so I'll type 60. If I do a space question mark, you notice I can also put in the number of seconds. Well, I have no reason to add seconds. So, 60 minutes and 15 seconds is just about as good as 60 minutes. All right, so hit enter. So now we've made sure that the timeout is set up. And again, I want to look at the terminal settings. Now, I can try to do show terminal. That's what I was doing in privilege exec. But you notice it says, hey, I just don't think that's a good command. Even if I exit up to the top and say show terminal, again, it's just not a command. It's invalid input. It was a privilege exec command. In some versions of the operating system, you can run those commands by prefacing them with a do. That way you don't have to leave configuration mode, and that puts you into the ability to launch privilege exec commands from configuration mode by putting the word do inside of it. Now from that process, I can see that there was about a 10-second idle time. So it's kind of giving me an idea of how long I've been idle in all of the time it took me to get up there to talk to you about the command. And within that time frame, I should still have plenty of time to not worry about having it time out automatically from me. Now let me show you something else here. If I do a Control-Z and it takes me back to the privilege exec, I'm getting a console message that tells me that configuration occurred from the console, by the console, and I don't have my prompt. I have to hit a space, well, actually I have to hit the Enter key to be able to get back here. Not that the message is bad, but sometimes it's nice to get out of or have a message appear and then immediately return to the prompt without you having to hit the Enter key. And those are some of the other things that you might try using to make your experience just a little bit better. So let's go to the Configure Terminal again. Go back to the line console 0. Let's do a question mark to see what our commands are. And here you see we have what's called a logging command. This is a part of what we saw. We were seeing a log message that was telling me that the configuration occurred. So let's see if there's anything with logging that could help us. The only command I have is called logging synchronous. And by the way, that's the great place for a tab key, because I don't know if I could have spelt synchronous. And what that does is it makes sure that when you exit the configuration mode or any mode where a console message comes up, that you return back to your prompt. Let's test it out. I'll do a Control-Z. Again, notice I did not have to hit the Enter key. I still got the log message, but I was right back at a command prompt. So again, little things like that can make your use of the console a lot easier. Now that we've done all of this, what we would like to do is save our work. And the command we used for that, remember, was copy running -config to startup-config. And I used the tab key, by the way, to finish that. That's why you saw these little line breaks. I wasn't hitting the Enter. So everything I've done is in the running config. You saw that I erased the startup config. And if this switch actually lost power and booted up, all the work I just did would have been gone. So let me hit Enter. There is the confirmation that it is the startup config file that you wanted to use as the destination. And it looks like it did it very quickly. In the old school days, we only had to type WR to do that, which was a short command for write memory. You notice it still works. And even though it's not official, they'll never ask that on a test. Probably won't expect you to do that on a simulator. So you just want to get used to being specific about what file you want to copy and where you want to paste it. All right, so let's close this down. Go to Switch 2 and see if we can remember all of those things that we just did. So we'll go to the Enable, Configure T, and we went to the line console 0, and we had, what do we have? Logging history. Or logging, I'm sorry, synchronous, the word I couldn't do. We had the exec timeout of 60 minutes. And I think we had the terminal command of changing the history. So let's see, history, size, 100. I think that was pretty much the changes that we made. This time I'll type end. Looks like logging synchronous worked. And copy run to start. Now how's that for shortcuts? And there it says, okay, is that the destination startup config? I'm going to hit Enter because yes it is. And I think we are caught up. And now if we lost power, at least our startup config would have all of these changes stored in it.